Welcome to today's episode of Rich, Simple, Human. I'm Lindsey Frances, legacy and wealth psychologist, and today I'm sitting down with my great friend Tom Lawrence. You may have heard him on the show before. He's so good, he's back for more. In fact, there's so much changing in our lives because the marketplace is so interesting, I'll use that positive word, that we've got lots to share with you today. Tom is a leadership development consultant, founder of High Definition Leadership, and so much more. Tom, welcome back to Rich, Simple, Human.
Thank you, Lindsey. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always a good thing when you get invited back to someone's house. So,
absolutely. And here we are in the house. So let's make us a house of enthusiasm and encouragement for those leaders out there who are listening. If you are leading an organization, an investment portfolio, or even a family, you may want to just prick up your ears because we're going to talk about what happens as we get older and the way that our desires and uniqueness tend to drift away. Tom, you used a lovely word in our first show. I'm not going to attempt it, but it begins with B. Would you share that word and tell me what you mean when you use it?
bifurcation. So it really is this concept of splitting in two, obviously there is only two parts to that, bifurcation. And often what happens is people have an experience of this bifurcation that typically goes unnoticed, typically goes unseen, unacknowledged. And then suddenly they're in their mid-40s, early 50s, and they're looking around and thinking, I'm not where I was planning to be. I'm not doing what I was planning to do. I'm not who I thought I was going to be. And they start to feel very uncomfortable. And typically speaking, people look outward at everything that they don't have or everything that they haven't become, rather than looking inward, which is significantly harder to do, obviously. And so they look outward and they see everything that's missing and they start to blame everyone that's not there or everyone that is there. And this bifurcation is hugely painful, very costly for relationships, financially, emotionally, spiritually, physically. There's all sorts of kind of outworkings and manifestations of people, experiencing this bifurcation. And it's something that I like to try to help people to identify early, prevent, or repair once they found it.
Yes, and for those chief execs listening thinking, that's not me, I'm exactly who I set out to be, and I'm sure this doesn't cost my business any money. Tom, I think we've got the data to prove that people who aren't in alignment with who they're meant to be don't perform as well. In fact, they don't perform at all. And as they get older, this becomes more grinding in your soul and you perform poorly. Neuroeconomic decision making is compromised. You make poor decisions financially as well. That costs your business money, because you are not walking in integrity, authenticity, and we could both bold and say your original calling. Tom, what on earth do we do about this? Because this is serious and it's not really a conversation that's on the table very often, because of course, organizations reward people for being who they're not meant to be and meeting the cookie cutter statement that leadership design in whichever business has said they should be meeting. What do we do and how do we know that this is happening?
Yeah. And honestly, this is one of the hardest leadership and identity challenges that there is. Largely because for high performers, the false self actually works quite effectively. And because it works quite effectively, the wrong version of them gets promoted, it earns money, it wins respect, it builds influence, it creates this moat around itself as a measure of kind of global recognition, but also it becomes a method of self-preservation because it produces results. It's a real challenge for people to, if I'm following the metaphor, to put down the drawbridge and come out of the environment that they have built around themselves. A really, really important question that we have to carefully ask ourselves and think about early on is, what have you become successful at that you never intended to become? And it's a really challenging question because they might come back and answer, well, I'm really good at managing crises, or being the smartest person in the room, or protecting myself, or whatever it might be. But they often expose something slightly deeper that sits behind that. And, when we're looking at our deep convictions, when we're looking at our highest aspirations, all of these different things, it then has to lead us to other conversations and questions. Things like, what do you consistently do under pressure that you then later regret? Those sorts of questions are challenging and painful to assess and to look at, but you have to do it. You have to ask it. You have to carefully kind of peel back these things. And with the core premise really of getting to the middle of it, which is asking questions like, who are you becoming? Who are you called to become? And what is resisting that call? What's resisting that innate draw? Because I think fundamentally, when we can separate who we are from what we do, who we want to be from what got us to where we are, suddenly we can have much richer conversations, and we fundamentally start to live a much richer life.
We live in purpose when we manage to crack this. And of course, that's the satisfaction beyond success. That's the peace. Nobody wakes up, and I think we said this on the last show, nobody wakes up every day and thinks, I just need more money. People wake up every day and think, I just don't feel quite as happy as I should do, but I appear to have everything. They're the kind of clients we work with, and they can't work out what's wrong. So then they go into the default of, well, just maybe if I had a bit more money, I'd be happier. And we know that doesn't work. We know that it just drives this even bigger external focus into, maybe I need another Ferrari or holiday or whatever it is. It becomes this material chase that's not fulfilling. Tom, you are the master of diagnostics. Anybody listening to Tom and I thinking, are they talking about therapy? No, Tom is a finance professional, former wealth manager and private banker, and has a wealth of experience in terms of diagnostics. Tom, can I ask you the question, how do you help someone see the gap between the leader they were created to be and the one they accidentally became?
You do it carefully. You do it sensitively. The main challenge is not helping them to see it. The challenge is helping the person to see it without triggering the withdrawal of the drawbridge, right? This defensiveness, shame, or self-justification. And so I would typically rarely start with the gap itself. A safer, easier, more comfortable place to start is with their aspirations. So, asking questions. I love asking questions. So questions like, when you are at your absolute best as a leader, as a husband, as a father, as a wife, as an individual, what do people experience from you? That question can start to peel things back. Another one, what kind of questions do people have about you after you've left the room? That one's a much harder one to answer honestly. And so you kind of have to sometimes get to it later, depending on how defensive people are, but it's an important one to ask. Another one, in 5 years from now, in 5 years' time, what would you love your team to thank you for? What is it, the thing that you want to be thanked for doing? Is it for your individual contribution, or is it how you made them feel? Is it what you enabled them to become? Everybody is on a journey of becoming. We are human beings. We're not human doings. And so often people live life as a human doing, and they completely miss the being part. But not only that, but they also forget that everyone else is a human being rather than a human doing. And so it's a very important question to ask. What would you like to be thanked for in 5 years from now? And occasionally with one-to-one clients, I mentioned this in the last podcast. We'll look at what is it that people say about you after you've passed on, after you've left this world. What's your eulogy? How about we write your own eulogy? What do you want included in that? And then, moving this conversation forward, once people have articulated that, once they've got that picture, you can then really start to explore the reality. Questions then following on from that, how often do you think people experience that version of you today? Or what's getting in the way of you living there now? Where are you most unlike the leader that you've just described? Because often this bifurcation happens in small ways. It happens in subtle ways. People think about how they are at their best and they ignore how they are at their worst. They don't necessarily think, nobody thinks of themselves as greedy. Like there's nobody in the world who goes, yeah, I'm greedy. And they say it with virtue or relish. Like everybody imagines they're generous. But then when you start to tease that out and ask it, okay, well, how does that show up in your life? What does that look like? How does that present itself to other people? Suddenly you can start to
I
peel
love
that back
that
a
word
little more.
greedy, actually. I used it recently. I said to somebody, I feel greedily expectant about what was about to happen in an experience I was having. And I was like, oh, this is a really weird. I was trying to find words that were a bit better. And I was like, is it okay to be greedily expectant? This person's like, what are you talking about? But when we've got this language, when we're being coached, when we've got an expert like you alongside us, we can move so much more quickly because you're there with the language, with like you say, the ability to unfold, unpeel, keep going, go deeper, go deeper. And using these sorts of approaches in financial spaces and leadership spaces is transformational. This is the pre-governance piece that isn't being done anywhere else that you do. We're not talking about where I'm going to put my pension or how I'm going to structure my ISA or whatever it is I'm dealing with. We're talking about why am I alive and what am I doing in my job and how do I do that better? And then what legacy am I leaving behind? I could talk about this for days, Tom. It's so exciting. I want to ask you why this happens. So the question is, in the marketplace, high performers, in fact, in any arena, high performers get heavily rewarded for being the wrong version of themselves. How do you make going backwards feel like a gain rather than a loss? You know the unpicking you do. I want to know how you make it less painful.
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. And I think that humans' avoidance of pain is innate. It's inherent. I mean, you can see that just in the natural world. If you break your leg and someone touches it, you'll flinch away from it. You don't lean towards pain. What has to happen first is a maturity of the individual to understand that actually leaning towards the pain and towards the friction is the only way that you're going to be able to ultimately deal with it. So reframing pain and friction and loss into a healthy, open-minded growth mindset is actually the starting point of this. You don't just tell someone, oh, well, that's okay. You're going to completely change and that'll be that. Like it's a journey and a process to help somebody along that walk to realize. And again, some of that front work, I love that term, pre-governance. If we're thinking about it in a pre-governance manner, really what we have to do is help them to identify how much of their current systems and structures are helping and enabling them versus hindering them and tripping them up. And so, it sounds really glib, but when somebody talks about whatever their situation is, simply ask them, and how's that working out for you? Is quite a quick way to bottom out on it. Because the chances are by the time they're speaking with you, they know that, well, not very well. But then you go, okay, all right. So if it's not working out all that well for you and you're not comfortable with it and you're not happy with it and you have this deep sense of satisfaction, is there merit in going through just a little bit more pain now to experience a completely pain-free life or a largely pain-free life later? And often when you deal with people who are in pain but are fundamentally rational, they realize that the answer to that question is yes, and it's okay to experience pain and to go through it. And sometimes that then looks like giving up the things that previously validated them, whether it is earning exorbitant amounts of money, whether it is winning respect. I think we talked last time about the lies that money tells us, significance and security and status. The three, those three things will often be a lie, but we can explain, when we can expose the lie that is, that they have experienced for so long because they've been drinking that Kool-Aid for such a long time. We can say, okay, well, let's put that cup down because it's not helping you, and let's learn how to regulate ourselves and the system through other things. And so, talking to somebody and inviting them to return to a more authentic version of themselves, we could talk about it that way, can start sometimes by saying, well, let's give up what made you successful. But it's a terrible sales pitch. And the mistake is that framing actually starts to make them think that they're going backwards, and it isn't. The goal is not regression, it's integration and restructure. It's how do we not become less capable, less ambitious, less disciplined, or less successful? That's not the goal. But it's how do we stop paying for all of that success with pieces of ourselves? And that conversation shifts when we then start asking, what is this version of you costing? Not necessarily financially, but personally, relationally, spiritually, emotionally, professionally. That's a very big shift in the conversation.
Can I urge you now, listeners, to rewind on what Tom's just said, because he's just articulated what authentic leadership and self-awareness looks like. And that process will capture that, Tom, hopefully as a reel. But that's so important for people to understand. It's not the more, and it's not the giving up, but it's the awareness of how I'm using this tool in the wrong way. And like you just said, we fundamentally believe that more money will make us more secure, more significant, and more accepted. And it works in the opposite direction. It's a lie. It doesn't work that way. And we end up chasing our tails and just creating a deeper hole as we just go round and round in these little circles.
For sure. And largely because of focus, right? That we all have biases, and our focus really directly impacts this, because the vast majority of high performers have spent years measuring, firstly objectively, but then actually becomes an inherent measurement of what they have gained, what they have, obtained. Almost none of them have carefully measured what they have lost or what they have surrendered. And that redefinition of success, right? Highly driven people that have built wonderful businesses, fantastic organizations, and have completely lost their family as a result. You go, well, was that cost inherently worth it? Was the return justified? Was it justified really? Because maybe you've achieved a status and a level now where actually you don't need to keep paying that cost. You can do something else. Or people pleasers who are loved by everyone, but they're trusted by no one because of their inherent nature. I was working with a visionary, a phenomenal visionary, had just the most extraordinary mind to see things, and had real, genuine influence, but was constantly exhausted. And these sorts of traits, the costs, at a certain point you get to ask that question of yourself. And the vast majority of the people that Lindsey, you and I work with, actually the cost started as financial, and it stopped being a financial cost.
Yeah, the clients that you and I have aren't often the ones saying, I can't afford it. They're the ones saying, I just don't have time, because their focus has gone, and our 24 hours is disappearing, and they can't really see the wood for the trees. And I think that's an exciting space to work in. Can I ask you, when you begin to engage with a potential client, or somebody you meet, as we do at these events, or we might be out and about, how do you tell the difference between somebody who is actually leading with genuine purpose and somebody who is leading from fear dressed up as authority?
Wow. Yes. Fundamentally, purpose creates responsibility, where fear creates dependency. So at a first glance, both leaders can look strong, right? They both make decisions in difficult situations. They set direction, they challenge people, and they care about the results. It is really not to suggest that people that are driven by purpose don't care about the results. But the difference lies just below beneath the surface of the behavior. a purpose-led leader is trying to advance something bigger than themselves. They fundamentally understand that their value to society, their value to the world, and their self-value sits outside of themselves in something bigger. It is not based on something that is selfish or self-seeking. Whereas, this fear-driven leader is often trying to protect something about themselves. It is self-focused. It's inward-focused. How do I avoid failure? How do I avoid a loss of control or reduce criticism or relevance or being exposed? This sort of exposing fear is innate in an awful lot of high performers because they have imposter syndrome, a large proportion of them. Because if you were to track it back a long way, perhaps their mum never said they were proud of them, or their dad never said, I love you, or whatever it might be. And these roots then grow and form very, very strong structures in their lives that drive behavior. And I think it's really important that we do peel back that. And a way to spot that difference really is to watch their response to challenge. So when purpose is challenged, the leader becomes interested. They might disagree strongly, right? But fundamentally, they remain open to the conversation because they're fundamentally trying to discover what is true. When on the other side, fear becomes challenged, the leader becomes threatened. The conversation quickly shifts and they're answering and defending their position rather than trying to fundamentally discover where
that was
the truth
an absolutely
lies.
Brilliant answer, Tom. For anybody listening, you've just heard the most powerful leadership consultant in the world describe what he does because it works. I couldn't have answered that question. As I was asking you, I was thinking that was terribly mean because I don't know what I would have said. But as you were talking, I'll be honest, as you were talking, of course, we're spotting as coaches, consultants and advisors, control, fear, defensiveness. And we're picking up on that automatically because we know that points towards this self, the sort of me and not the we based leadership that you've just described. Of course.
Can I jump in and give you another question that I ask? This is a horrible, horrible question. And sometimes I don't always have the guts to ask it. But if I have a good relationship with the individual and I trust them and they trust me, asking a question that sounds something like, what outcome would be so painful for you that you would look to control people in order to prevent it? That is a really exposing question. It's deeply uncomfortable.
Please have that as a reel. Tom, just repeat that question that you're going to posture. This is the hardest question you're going to ever get asked as a leader. Tom?
Yeah. What outcome would be so painful for you that you would be tempted to control people in order to prevent it from happening?
I'm thinking I might guide a visualization for somebody on that later. Shall I tell you how it goes? Oh,
do it.
Isn't that exciting? Let's do that next time. That's harsh. My mind is spinning out as I think about that. Because this is where we get ourselves into the territory of blackmail, of becoming the leaders we never expected to be, where we find ourselves actually doing things that we shouldn't have done, where we've done some sort of deal where there's tax avoidance. Not that I'm talking about myself, but you see it happen, Tom, and you think, how did this person get there? They're suddenly under a tax investigation, or there's criminal allegations being made, or there's money laundering or something happening, because exactly what you have said has just happened. There was an outcome.
Yes. And we always blur the line before we cross it. We all set lines up, and yet we smudge it. We'll get up to the line and we'll smudge the line, and they go, oh, well, and then we'll cross the line.
I think a diagnostic on that would be good. Where are you smudging the line? Because we all do it. And you and I talked a lot before we started this recording about the lines of obedience and purpose that you and I smudge. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be obedient to my calling, or I'm not going to do this because of my faith. And then we smudge it. We move the boundaries a bit. We're cheating, essentially. We're cheating.
Yes.
Well, of course we are.
Lying
we pay the price, with faith with that. But that is very, very funny. What a great conversation to visualize. Where am I smudging the boundaries? Oof. This is so good. I've got so many good questions for you, and we're not going to get through all of them. I am going to ask you the next one. Passive leadership can look like humility sometimes. How dangerous is this? And how do you name it to somebody who can't see what they are doing in being a passive leader?
Yeah. Passive leadership is honestly one of the most dangerous. I would even call it a leadership failure, actually. I wouldn't even just call it a style. I would call it a leadership failure because it wears the clothes of virtue, right? It's this pretense. Control looks like control. Arrogance looks arrogant. Ego eventually reveals itself. Whereas passivity masquerades behind this mask of humility, of patience, of kindness, of servant leadership. And that's actually why it ends up surviving for a long time. But it almost inevitably morphs at a certain point. It becomes narcissism. The passive leader says, "Oh, I don't want to be controlling," and then what the team ends up experiencing is nobody's making the call. I want the team to own it, but this leader just disappears whenever the difficult decisions come up, and these sorts of things. And the truth is, leadership roles carry responsibilities that cannot be delegated at times. There is a responsibility, there is a buck stop that you cannot get beyond and you can't get past. And when you try to, you can't outsource clarity or direction or accountability or protection or priority. If it's your responsibility as the leader to prioritize something, you can't outsource it. And so if you then avoid it and become passive, it doesn't disappear. It just falls on someone else. And usually it ends up falling on the most conscientious person in the group. So it then becomes really difficult. So here again, I said I love questions. Here's a question I would ask. When difficult decisions arise, do people end up feeling lighter or heavier after speaking with you? Because a healthy leader absorbs uncertainty and helps people to retain clarity, whereas a passive leader just doesn't do that. They absorb the clarity and they just leave uncertainty with people. So yeah, when these difficult situations come up, do people go away feeling lighter or heavier when they've spoken?
I see this all the time. And it doesn't get called out, Tom, because they're not really doing anything that's terribly offensive. And they're still probably performing okay, but it's so incredibly unhelpful. That's the biggest leadership failure that survives undiagnosed for the longest.
Yeah, and you cannot call it out directly. It's because it has these roots in narcissism. It's like trying to. I don't know if you've ever done gardening. You've tried taking out one of those stinging nettles. It always finds a way of twisting back and stroking your arm. They're a nightmare. Dealing with passive leaders really can feel like that because of this narcissistic root that can be in there sometimes. So if you just come out and say you're failing to lead, like some personalities would lap that up, but a passive leader just won't. You have to think about it in a different way and express it in a different way. You have to be talking about their team and say, look, I think that your team experiences your restraint differently than you intended them to. What you possibly call empowerment is actually creating ambiguity. It's leaving a vacuum of certainty. And even things like you might be trying to protect people from your authority, but what they really need is leadership. People want to be led. We all want leadership.
Do you know what? I think on that note, Tom, that's going to bring us to the end of the conversation today. We all want leadership. We all want to be led, whether you are in a corporate role, whether you are managing an investment portfolio, whether you are leading a household, or whether you are in a relationship as a friend or as a sort of romantic partner. We all want to be led and we all want to feel that security. This is particularly key in parenting, but that's a whole other topic for another day. Tom, as we've now pitched you as the most insightful leadership consultant in the world, I may be making that the title of today's show. There's been so much in here as a catch-up call. People I know will want to talk to you now. What's the best place to find you and how can they connect with you for more information?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, just Tom Lawrence. I mean, there are quite a few of us, and I'm not the footballer, so don't get confused with that. But yeah, if you look up high definition leadership and Tom Lawrence, then you'll find me on LinkedIn. And I've deliberately called it something slightly vague as high definition leadership because my prescription is not the same as yours, and what is high definition to me won't necessarily be high definition to you. And I think that part of what I love doing working with people is going through these diagnostics to kind of assess, okay, just like an optometrist would, right? Okay, well, what lenses do we need to slot in here? What is the view of life that you have, and how do we augment what's not working for you to make sure that you can see in 2020?
Well, look, you're going to get those show notes linked. It'll be linked in the show notes below. Until next time, Tom and I will put this out into the world, and please reach out to either of us if you'd like more of these conversations. We have just touched on what authentic leadership looks like today, and how to know if you really are in the space you're meant to be in, or have you ended up somewhere completely different from where you set out because you've got this problem with bifurcation. Have I said that? Bifurcation. Tom, I've got it wrong every single time for the last 6 months. And it makes me sound really stupid, and I'm not. But that's a great word. So if you think you might be suffering from bifurcation, please get in touch. Until next time, thank you for listening. Please make sure you subscribe to the show. Please make sure you signed up for the assets, because you will also get the newsletter from today. And Tom and I might even pop some diagnostics or something on there for you. So sign up, sign up, sign up. We are always giving away free stuff. Until next time, try and stay as a rich and simple human. Remember, your life needs purpose, because we will all be dead. And think about what you're doing in the 24 hours, because that's all you've got. Until next time, goodbye.